Good morning and welcome to the Full Scottish. Bringing you stories today from Scotland and around the world. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, and joining me to discuss the stories behind the headlines, two distinguished guests. Francis Coppola, renowned economist and author of the book The Case for People's QE, and also joined by Stuart McMillan, MSP, who has been an MSP since 2007 when he was a list MSP, and since 2016 he has been the directly elected MSP for Greenock and Inverclyde. He serves on a number of Holyrood committees and also is the official piper at Holyrood. We start as usual in our news with an update from Ukraine on this day 886 since the start of the full-scale invasion of the country by Russia. An oil depot was burning in Polovaya, Kursk Oblast, Russia on Sunday morning after a reported Ukrainian drone strike. The acting regional governor, Alexei Smirnov, confirmed the attack, saying 82 firefighters and 32 units of equipment were involved in trying to put out the fires. Russia's defense ministry said its forces had taken control of the settlement of Lozovatska in the Donetsk region of Ukraine, Interfax news agency reported, as the Russians advanced towards the city of Pokrovsk. The Institute for the Study of War, ISW, said Ukrainian forces advanced on Saturday within Vovchansk, northeast of Kharkiv city, amid continued Russian ground attacks. In Donetsk Oblast, geolocated footage indicated Ukraine regained lost positions in northern Pivdena, southeast of Toretsk, the ISW said, while Russian forces advanced west and southwest of Donetsk city and were filmed raising their flag in northern Krasnohorivka, west of the city. Ukrainian attack drones damaged a Russian Tu-22M3 strategic bomber at a military airfield in northern Russia, according to reports. A long-range Tu-22M3 supersonic bomber was hit at the Olenya military airfield near Olenogorsk in northern Russia, about 1,800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Ukrainian media outlet Ukrainska Pravda reported further attacks on Russian military airfields in the city of Engels in the Saratov region and Yagalevo in the Ryazan region. A drone also hit an oil refinery in Ryazan. Ukrainian officials say Russian shelling killed at least 5 civilians on Saturday in attacks on the Kherson, Sumy and Kharkiv regions of Ukraine. In southern Russia's Belgorod region, the regional governor Vyacheslav Gladkov said Ukrainian shelling and drone attacks killed 1 person, injured 2, and damaged homes and other buildings. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has told US Secretary of State Antony Blinken that Beijing denies charges it is helping Russia's war effort in Ukraine, in a side meeting at the Association of Southeast Asian Nations summit in Vientiane, the capital of Laos. The Ukrainian maritime corridor transported 60 million tons of cargo, mainly from the Greater Odessa ports, in the last 11 months, the Ukrainian Seaports Authority said, despite attacks on port infrastructure. 40.6 million tons of this total amount was grain exports delivered to 46 countries. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to travel to Kyiv in August, marking his first visit to Ukraine since Russia launched its full-scale invasion 2 years ago. The Ukrainian Air Force has said that Russia has increased the number of ballistic strikes over the past few months, forcing Ukrainian forces to think more about passive defense tactics such as camouflage and using false positions. The governor of the Bryansk region in southern Russia, Alexander Bogomas, reported a massive drone attack on the region. Turning to you, Francis, there's a lot every day in the news about a Ukrainian movement here or a Russian movement there, but I'm interested in your view as an economist. Can Ukraine survive with Western support economically, not in terms purely of the weapons which are supplied, but with Russia hell-bent on destroying its infrastructure, its electricity? Can we support it for daily life?
It's very difficult when you've got constant attacks on your infrastructure. Yes, in theory, you can borrow money from the West or be given money by the West to rebuild it. But if it's then being destroyed again, it can become a bit counterproductive. So I'm not quite sure how they're going to deal with this, because the energy infrastructure is going to continue to be a target, clearly. So I think the right move with this is going to have to be probably air defences to actually try and stop the constant attacks on the energy infrastructure, rather than going for economic support to enable them to rebuild it. That would be where I think we have to go.
Thank you. Stuart, anything to add on Ukraine?
I think the fact that this has been going on for 886 days, as you stated at the beginning of your update, and I know of Ukrainians who are in my constituency who have came here, they had to flee, and they've settled, and they've been welcomed within the community. But they will want to go back home, and it's hugely important, in my opinion, that the West does support Ukraine, but also that some type of dialogue happens between Ukraine and Russia, because I think we all want to see this war stop. People want to try to get back to Ukraine to rebuild their lives and rebuild their country, but I don't see any type of dialogue happening anytime soon, for understandable reasons. But the West cannot leave Ukraine alone. The West has got to support Ukraine economically, and Francis is right in terms of the suggestion regarding the air defences, because we know that the Russian Federation has been targeting particular infrastructure in Ukraine, and that will only continue. And we know that. But it's heartbreaking on a daily basis to see what's happening to a country, really, that is one of our neighbours within Europe.
Thank you both. In Gaza, at least 39,258 Palestinians have been killed and 90,589 injured since 7th of October. Today, the story is not about Gaza, it's about a rocket falling on a football field in the Golan Heights and the tragic death of Druze boys playing football there. Francis, what's your view? Is this starting to spiral out of control? Not minimizing the tragic events in Gaza, but is this looking now like the start of a full Middle Eastern war?
Possibly, although I think we should remember that Israel has had not a very good record of war in Lebanon. It doesn't tend to end very well. So my take on it is that, despite the calls now from the right wing in Israel for some time now for a ground invasion in Lebanon, and some really very fiery language coming from the right, my take on it is that Netanyahu is probably going to be quite reluctant to do it, or certainly the IDF are, because they've been burned a few times before and they know how badly this can end. Hezbollah are a very, very formidable force, and they're backed by Iran. I also got the impression the response from the US was muted, shall we say, not least because it's not at all clear who actually did this. That immediately the IDF said it was done by Hezbollah. We have evidence it was an Iranian missile. But eyewitnesses on the ground said that it looked more like the Israeli Iron Dome had malfunctioned. And until we are clearer, perhaps with some proper forensic investigation, as to what exactly happened, I think it's going to be quite hard to justify much in the way of retaliation against Lebanon. I know there have been airstrikes overnight, but certainly a ground invasion, I don't think it's going to get much backing from the West until we know what's happened.
Yes, it's important to stress that at the time of going to air, there was no clear view of the cause of this. Secretary of State Blinken has said in the United States that it looked like it was Hezbollah. The Lebanese foreign minister said he doubted that it was a Hezbollah attack. But both Hezbollah and the Israelis have been trying to play down the threat to one another in the region. So this may have been a miscalculation, but it could be a very deadly miscalculation, Stuart.
Yes, when I saw the news about what happened, kids out playing football, and this atrocity happened. I just thought of kids in my community out playing football, out doing what kids do, out enjoying themselves, and then this awful event took place. The Middle East, as we know, the Middle East is there is no easy solution there, and Israel, as a state, it does have the right to defend itself. Every state has the right to defend itself. However, if we look at Douglas, you came out with the numbers of people who have been killed in Gaza since last October. And then we now have this situation in the north. It's absolutely horrendous, and I know we are going to be going into the US election shortly, but I think the US election and the outcome of that can play a hugely important part of trying to get to some type of solution, depending on who actually wins that election. And the one, I mean, I was thinking about this overnight, that in my 52 years, I remember times in the past when there seemed to be a bit of hope that some type of peace could be found in the Middle East, and governments, particularly the US, played such a hugely important part of bringing people together to try to forge some type of dialogue and some type of peace. And we need that more than ever now, because if that doesn't happen, now whether it's the US election, whether it's the new UK government, if that doesn't happen, then more people are just going to die on a daily basis, and the prospects of trying to get some type of lasting peace will be even further away as compared to where they currently are.
Thanks. You mentioned there, Stuart, the UK government. Now there have been increased calls for the UK to stop selling arms to Israel. Is this important, or is it merely a token gesture, given how small the contribution of the UK armaments to the Israeli war machine is?
I think it's important. I know the SNP have been calling for this. I mean, I do think it is important. But I think that's only one, for me, it's only one element of what is required. Dialogue, discussion, engagement is hugely important in this as well. And if countries and leaders don't talk, then we will never find solutions to any of the problems that people are seeing on a daily basis. And also, in this case, it's the conflict, it's the war that's going on between Israel and Gaza. So we need to we need the political leaders of countries to actually want to try to find some type of peace. And for that to happen, they need to have dialogue. They need to put pressure upon people to come to the table in the first instance. But and if that doesn't happen, sadly, we will see more lives being lost on a daily basis, and that will be one of the, in my opinion, that'll be one of the main catastrophes of our age, to be quite frank.
Yeah, one final quick question on that to you, Francis. The need for dialogue and the ability of other countries to put pressure on the area to encourage it. We've seen the UK government, the previous UK government, Lord Cameron, completely ignored when he went to Israel for a Baerbock going from Germany, equally ignored. Always in the past, it has been the United States which has been able to put pressure on Israel or encourage it to take a rational position. But now Netanyahu seems not even to be listening to the United States. Is there hope for pressure to bring dialogue about?
I think it's very disturbing, actually, that Netanyahu increasingly seems not to be listening to anybody, and imposing kind of petty humiliations on his allies. I mean, in the end, the allies can't ignore the popular movements in their own countries, and the people of America don't like being treated like that. So I don't think this is a viable strategy. Actually, at some point, Israel is going to have to come to the negotiating table. The question is with whom. And the other development that there's been recently, which I think we should be paying more attention to, is actually what China's been up to. Because China has been facilitating an agreement between all the other states in the region. Right now, with that agreement between China and the other states in the region, including Palestine, but also including Jordan and Egypt and even Russia, which isn't far away, remember, Israel increasingly looks very encircled. And I think we should be paying attention to that.
Thank you. As Stuart alluded to there, the US elections will have a huge effect probably on the Middle East, also on Ukraine, and very likely on our daily lives in the next couple of years. So since President Biden announced his decision not to run for re-election last Sunday, Kamala Harris has become the candidate-elect for the Democrats, now has enough support to be the candidate, and has overturned Trump's poll lead in a week. I'm interested, Francis, what you think. To me, she seemed to have disappeared for the last 5 years and has come out as a new politician, new to the American public. So some commentators have said that this poll increase for her is a honeymoon period. Can she sustain this support and go on to win? Does she have the policies which are there which will beat Trump?
I think the big problem for her is actually that we don't actually know what her policies are, and she hasn't got a great deal of time to define them. Because obviously they were expecting Biden to go into this election. That's what they were going up for, and all of a sudden it's Kamala Harris, and presumably would have a different policy slate, not least because some of Biden's policies, particularly actually his Gaza policy, I mean his foreign policy generally, actually is pretty unpopular in America generally. And because he hasn't also managed to get the message across about how good his economic policy has been, which, you know, he deserves a lot more credit for than he gets. So she no doubt will want to put her own slate forward, but she's only got less than 4 months to do this in. And that's quite a tall order, really. So depending on what happens on the other side of the fence, you know, some of Trump's pronouncements are sounding increasingly deranged, but they are attracting an audience. I would still regard this election as too close to call, personally.
Thank you. Stuart, I'd like your views on the policies, but I'd also like a view on the personal side of this also, for the statements that Francis was referring to there from Trump, and possibly more particularly from J.D. Vance, his vice presidential candidate. I've heard lots of SNP MSPs talk about the level of abuse that politicians face in the Scottish Parliament, but it seems nothing compared to what's happening in the United States. How low do you think Trump and his supporters will go in attacking Kamala Harris?
Sadly, I think there will be no depths. There will be off limit, to be quite frank. I mean, we've seen how the Donald Trump campaigns. We've seen some of his comments and pronouncements in the past, and I'm quite sure that all three of us have been quite shocked and quite stunned by some of what he has said in the past, and also supporters of his. And I think the
Well,
fact
I'm
that
just going
the
to do the
Democrats have
dishes
now
and
got
then I'm back.
Democrats have now got a new
Or should I
candidate
go out and help?
for for
Is
for
that,
the
yeah,
remainder of
okay.
this campaign, then and obviously the Republicans clearly wouldn't have been focusing their ire
I'm waiting
upon
for anybody else to go.
Kamala Harris. They would have been doing so against President Biden. So I think this actually opens up the Republicans to be even more antagonistic towards Kamala Harris and the Democrats. Now, I think your question about policies, I agree with Francis. I don't really know what the policy slate from Kamala Harris will actually be. And she does have a very short space of time to try and put that onto the public record. I think the one opportunity I think Kamala Harris will actually have in this is that people will be listening a lot more to what she has to say over the course of the election campaign. So it might give her that opportunity to actually get her points across and some of the policy areas that she actually does want to put forward, because people will be listening more. But nonetheless, it's shaping up to be an absolutely fascinating election. And I mean, we will all be clearly kind of watching what's going on with great interest because of what will happen in the US, but also the economic impact afterwards. But at the same time, there is no question regarding Donald Trump and where they'll go. Sadly, I think nothing will be off limits in terms of their attacks against Kamala Harris.
Yeah, the question as to whether she can win or not. Obviously, she will be fabulously popular in California, her home state, and on the eastern seaboard. The question will be, can she win in the swing states of Pennsylvania, Arizona, possibly Georgia, which seem to, and Ohio, where Trump has pulled his vice presidential candidate from. I'm interested in your view, Francis. Does it really make any difference who the vice presidential candidate is? Or is it just something that keeps journalists talking at the start of a campaign? Will Vance make a difference, positive or negative? And can Kamala Harris win those swing states?
Well, historically, vice presidents, running mates, haven't necessarily made that much of a difference unless they're very controversial. Like Sarah Palin was, for example.
Yeah.
And so the choice of running mate can win or lose the election if it's close. So I would say that JD Vance is possibly doing Trump a fair bit of damage at the minute, but that's not necessarily fatal. And who Kamala Harris chooses, I think, is going to be really important because this election is going to be so close, and it's going to be decided by the voters in the swing states, and they will look at the running mate as well as at Kamala Harris.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to the United Kingdom, the big political news, if we can call it news, was the announcement by Rachel Reeves this week that there is a £20 billion so-called black hole in public finances. I'll come to you later on this, Francis, for the economic view. But first of all, the political view, Stuart. I suppose you would say yous were telt in that the SNP throughout the campaign said there was an £18 billion black hole, which was denied by Labour. They were also told by the Institute of Fiscal Studies that it was there. And now they're having to accept that there is. It does seem to an observer quite bizarre that it wasn't known, given that I understand that access to Treasury officials in an election year is offered to all the opposition parties from January. So it doesn't seem like something that would not be mentioned in discussions with Treasury officials.
Yeah. So, Douglas, you're absolutely right. This was highlighted time and time again by the SNP in the run-up to the UK election. Now, obviously, not our figures. You quoted the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who first highlighted this, and other organisations did so as well. So it was there for all to see. Now, the SNP, obviously, we're being accused of scaremongering and the like at the time. But the fact is that we are about to, tomorrow, now hear officially from the UK Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, that there is a funding black hole. So I think back to the election period, and there was one particular it was a TV debate that took place, and Anna Sarwar was on, and Anna Sarwar had indicated and said that read my lips, there'll be no austerity under Labour. Now that is about to be dismantled tomorrow. Because no matter what, this 18 billion or 20 billion pounds that announcement is going to take place tomorrow, that money will have to be found from somewhere. And that will have an impact upon the Scottish government budget as well, in addition to budgets across the UK. So I know in terms of the constituents that I deal with, how challenging life has been. We've had 14 years of austerity under the Tory government. We're now going to have austerity under Labour for whatever period of time that will be. So we are going to have more austerity. And that does not fill me with any joy whatsoever in terms of the job I've got to do trying to help my constituents. Because I know that many of my constituents are struggling. They have been struggling for years, and that sadly will only continue. We saw the effects, obviously, this week, the vote that took place on the SNP amendment to the King's Speech regarding the two-child cap. That I accept it wasn't in Labour's manifesto, but nonetheless, that's something that they could have done. They could have implemented that to try to assist, people, not only in my constituency but UK wide. So tomorrow, I will watch the statement, and my heart will sink, no doubt, because of the seriousness of what is about to unfold tomorrow, and how more difficult it's going to be to actually try and assist people who already genuinely are struggling on a day-to-day basis to live.
Thanks, Stuart. Francis, I'm going to ask you what might sound like a silly question. £20 billion is an incredible amount of money to me, but to an economist, to a politician, to a central banker, is it a huge amount of money? And can you put it in context of what that kind of cut means to individuals in the country?
Yeah. Okay, the UK's GDP is about £2.6 trillion. So we're talking less than 1% of GDP, which I hope will make people feel a bit better about it. It is a large hole, but it is not a catastrophic one. How we deal with it, one important thing, actually, obviously, given what I've said about GDP, because deficits and things like that are measured in relation to GDP, obviously, is to try and get the economy growing. So one thing I would like to see the Chancellor doing is deciding that maybe fiscal rules are not quite as rigid as they need to be when it comes to be, as she would like, when it comes to investment. and do a lot more investment to get the economy growing, because that would help. And the other thing about fiscal black holes, now we've heard all this language before, because this is exactly what the Tories did in 2010, actually. They said, oh my goodness, there's this fiscal black hole, the Tories have crashed, the Labour has crashed the economy. And that language was believed by a lot of people, and it helped keep them in power for 14 years. And so I think that Labour is repeating some of that this time in the hopes of, say, ensuring that they get a second term, because they're going to need a second term. And as somebody said, the difference between what the Tories did in 2010 and what Labour is saying now is that there really is a black hole this time, whereas in 2010 there wasn't. So they really have got a lot to do. But whenever you're trying to fix fiscal finances, it's all a question of how you do it. It doesn't have to fall on the most vulnerable. In the coalition government, that was a choice. It was a political choice by George Osborne to target the cuts at the vulnerable people in society. You didn't have to do that. It was a choice. Equally, Labour doesn't have to do that either. Yes, we do have to row back a bit on public spending, and we're probably going to have to raise taxes. But that does not have to fall on the most vulnerable people in society. It's a choice. And I'll be interested to see what choices Labour make, and whether they target their choices in a way that hurts vulnerable people, or places more burden upon those people who can afford it.
Yeah, a very good point. Labour also speaking in the last couple of weeks about getting people to work and getting the disabled into work, which again sounded very like the Tories over the last 14 years. But Francis, you wrote a very interesting article about getting people back to work and the effect it has on the economy. And I wonder if you could speak about that now, your conclusions to a wider audience for people who perhaps had not read that blog post.
Yeah, well, underlying all this is, we have actually since 2010 pretty much pivoted from what you might call an investment-led economy or a productivity-led economy to a work-led economy. And that means that all of our growth, and I do mean all of it, now comes from getting more people into work. And we do that partly by having high immigration. It's where all our growth comes from at the moment, is high immigration, because our entire growth model is get more people working. What we're not dealing with is really quite a crisis in productivity. You can have more output with the same number of people if each of them produces more. And that doesn't mean getting the whips out and lashing them. It might mean just giving them better tools. And that's where the whole need for investment comes in. That actually we've seen a massive investment slump in the last, in the last 15 years, even longer really, but particularly since Brexit. And it's taken two forms. One is capital investment. It's also taken another form as well, which we might call innovation, where what we call total factor productivity, which roughly equates to innovation, technology, improvements to business processes, improvements to management, all those kind of things. All of that has massively slumped. And so we're just not the innovation-led economy that we need to be. And I want to see Labour doing something specifically about that. And so all the talk about getting more people into work actually bothers me quite a bit, because it doesn't seem to be addressing that.
Yeah, thank you. Stuart, I'm interested in your view on, well, particularly what Francis is saying there about investment in Scotland, because of course the Scottish government does not have borrowing powers, so what the government can spend depends on the block grant, and the size of the block grant depends on what things the government in Westminster is allocating budget to. So how do you see this potential austerity or cuts generally affecting Scotland particularly?
In terms of the borrowing powers, also, we have limited borrowing powers, but generally it's very limited. So there is very little by way of headroom that the Scottish Government can deploy in terms of policy areas. In terms of investment, the Scottish Government have consistently ensure that the Scottish economy has done relatively well in terms of inward investment. Outside of London and the southeast of England, Scotland is the best performing nation or region within the UK and has consistently been that way for a number of years now. So the Scottish Government certainly have been attempting to do the right thing when it comes to the economy in that regard. I think it's really very interesting that we've got some politicians and some in the media criticising the Scottish Government actually for having offices outside of Scotland. Now, these offices actually do help to engage with potential investors to get investment into the country. So there's been obviously claims and politicians saying that these offices should be scrapped to save money for the Scottish budget. But actually, these offices will be generating inward investment into Scotland. So they are a good thing. They are important to try to help the economy. In terms of what's going to come forward, Francis is right in terms of the policy choices. The 14 years of austerity we had under the Tories and also the Lib Dems for a period, she was absolutely right in that. So the policy choices going forward with the new Labour government will be really, really interesting to see what they're going to do. But at the same time, I'm worried in terms of my constituents who already are struggling, as I said a few moments ago. We can try to change the economy, and we do have to become more productive. We do have to have more investment, more private investment as well as public investment. Because Francis is right. In terms of the level of public investment into the infrastructure, that clearly has fallen for the last 14 years. So we do need to get more public investment back in. I certainly my own constituency. I've got a list of things that I would love to see happen, but the money has not been there. And then you add in the situation we've had in terms of the inflation went up to 10%, so that having such a negative effect upon the construction sector. Now, whether that's building houses or whether that's building public infrastructure that we require. So there have been a wide variety of economic challenges that the Scottish Government has faced, but also can the UK government as well. Brexit has not helped. We know that. The Liz Truss quasi-quartering budget did not help, had such a negative effect upon the economy. So we know that what the Labour government has inherited has been an absolute mess. We know that. But going forward, we cannot, so the UK government cannot continue to put pressure upon those who are already struggling. They cannot do that. They need to have a different policy perspective to try to help people. Because I know that when people at the lower end of the income scale, if they have money, then they will be spending that money to live. And that's money that will be recirculated back into the economy, as compared to individuals at the top end who won't always actually want to invest the money, and the money can stay in the bank for them to gain interest. So there has to be a different policy perspective to actually genuinely try to help economies, the length and breadth of the UK, not just targeted areas that are going to make the wealthier even more wealthy.
Thank you. And in terms of making choices on spending money, of course, another big story this week was the defeat of the SNP amendment to the King's Speech for the abolition of the two-child cap. 7 Labour MPs lost the whip after voting for the amendment. Interestingly, they were all English MPs for English constituencies, and all of the new Scottish Labour MPs voted against the amendment, despite many claims that before that they would put pressure on Sir Keir Starmer to abolish this. When it came to the vote, none of them supported it. So, first of all, from the political point of view, Stuart, what is your take on it? And also, is this something that will blow over and be forgotten about, or is this something that is going to affect the Labour Party all the way up to the Scottish elections? The National, in an article, called it a fracture in the Labour Party. Is it that severe?
So Labour campaigned on change, and on Tuesday evening for this vote on the amendment. The fact that the amendment had so much cross-party support, I think it says a lot in terms of the strength of feeling of politicians from a wide variety of political parties on this particular issue. It wasn't just my party that had concerns. There were other parties too. So I think that's a point that I think we do have to recognise. I don't think this will blow over anytime soon. So the Labour campaign was obviously very much one of being positive. It was about change, and then at the very earliest opportunity, we see a continuation of the status quo. So I know certainly in my area, certainly with my local newspaper, the Greenock Telegraph, there has been it's been quite apparent in terms of the challenges against the new MP already. I've seen that on social media also. And certainly what I've picked up on social media in different parts of the country, there have been a lot of frustration and angst at some of the new MPs because of what they did. Now, this is not going to stop tomorrow. It's not going to go away tomorrow. This will continue because now that Labour were out of power for 14 years, they're now in power. In opposition, it's very easy to campaign for more money, more investment, and for different decisions to be taken. When you are in power, that comes with different responsibilities and the reality of actually taking those decisions. And that's what the new Labour government in Westminster have now got to face and deal with. So their decisions will be scrutinised, everything that they say will be listened to, and the public are also listening because the public voted for change, not the status quo with a different colour of result.
Thank you. Francis, your book, The Case for People's Quantitative Easing, spoke about how quantitative easing by central banks put money only in the hands of the rich, and that it should go to the people who need it most. Surely the two-child cap is the exact opposite of that it's keeping money from the people who need it most. So what is your view on it, and what in your view can be done to help relieve child poverty?
Yeah, I mean, the two-child limit is one of many restrictions on income, attacks on low-income people, put in place by the Conservative and previously the coalition governments, which were intended to be partially to be offset by quantitative easing. But the problem is that quantitative easing goes to better off people, the rich, and the cuts were targeted at the poor. So we saw widening inequality, and we saw asset price booms at the same time as people were struggling to make ends meet, and more children were ending up in poverty. That's the legacy of 14 years of Tory rule. The problem is what you do about it. I am personally of the opinion that balance needs to be shifted. I think that I do think that the way the Bank of England does things needs to be looked at, although I am a little bit concerned that the Bank of England does need to have operational independence. It's kind of a management thing, you set targets and then you say, right, you go off and achieve those targets, and as a manager you don't necessarily intervene. to tell your junior managers what to do. And it's kind of like that. That's the relationship between the government and the Bank of England. And there are various sacred cows that we need to be careful of with markets. Like we cannot use the Bank of England directly to finance government spending, because we will have a run on the pound if we do. That said, as I've said, I think that there are a lot of choices Labour could make. One of them would have been to go along with the SNP motion to abolish the 2-child limit. But that's only one among many restrictions on the income of the poor. And so there's a case for saying what you actually should do is look at it in the round, look at everything you need to do, all the many, many failures in the current benefit system, and come up with a package for dealing with all of it. I'm hopeful that that's what Labour's planning to do. It's just the optics of this were awful.
Yeah. Stuart, I imagine that child poverty is a subject very close to your heart. I believe you were the first MSP to raise the dependence in Scotland on food banks in the Scottish Parliament. Now, some people have said, well, that's what the Scottish Parliament is there for. Use your devolved powers to mitigate the effect of the 2-child cap. Now, I know you're also vice convener of the Delegated Powers Committee. Surely that's not what devolution is for, to mop up the mess which is made by Westminster.
No, the Scottish Parliament certainly was recreated and re-established to take decisions for the people of Scotland. There was never any sense that it was just to be there as a mitigation tool to the worst excesses of whichever party or parties were in power in Westminster. So I see the argument that has been also proposed by some political parties, but that's not what devolution was about. Now, because the other thing too, I mean, I've seen some of the claims that the Scottish Government could scrap the 2-child limit. No, they couldn't. They could mitigate, but they couldn't scrap, because the power lies at Westminster, not in Holyrood. But kind of go back to your key question, if the Scottish Government were to try and find the money to do this, as they have done with other things, including the bedroom tax, £140 million a year is spent by the Scottish Government on mitigation measures. Now, if the problem is fixed, if the problem is fixed at source, i.e. at Westminster, then that resource could then be invested in other areas of the public sector. I mean, that additional resource could actually go into maybe more into local authorities, more into the NHS or other policy areas. So mitigation is not a sustainable tool for the government in the Scottish Parliament. It just is not. It's been deployed, certainly smaller scale, but the Scottish Government can't go and mitigate everything that's been a problem coming from Westminster. That's just the reality of the situation. I think Francis touched upon also the 2-child limit and kind of a wider package. I absolutely agree. I mean, there does have to be kind of a wider consideration of child poverty and of poverty measures to try to take children and also families out of poverty. But at the same time, on this one policy area, which Labour politician after Labour politician in the Scottish Parliament and elsewhere have also agreed with the SNP in the past that the policy that was introduced by the Tories and the coalition government was abhorrent. It was punishing women. It was punishing families across the UK. So this one policy issue alone, if that was dealt with, that would have actually built up a level of additional credibility for the new Labour administration in Westminster. But as Francis said, I mean, the optics of what happened on Tuesday were awful, and this actually has taken some of the shine away from the new Labour government, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
Thank you. Very clear. Final area today, renewable energy. Key issue for Scotland when we produce so much of it. I'll start with you, Francis, the economics of it. Two questions, really. The GB Energy, which Labour is talking about setting up and spending 8.5 billion on it. Can that do more than the now privatised UK Green Investment Bank did with 3 billion back in 2011? And is there a realistic economic case for renewable energy when it's pegged to the market price of gas?
Oh, there's some good questions there. Well, I would hope that GB Energy would be a little more successful than the Green Investment Bank. And I would also hope that it stays in public hands rather than being privatised ever so quickly, which was a bit unfortunate. But then, that's an ideological decision, isn't it? It's slightly disturbing that the Labour government appears to be going down the PFI route, saying we have to have we're using public money, in effect, to pump prime, to draw in private investment. That can work well, but you have to be very careful about the terms, because as we've seen with PFI, when that's happened before, we've ended up with long-lasting and very expensive public liabilities. So I think we have to watch that. I would hope they're not going to go down that route again. They need to find other ways of drawing in private money in a way that doesn't mean huge amounts of returns for private shareholders and all the losses accruing to the public purse. So that's one thing that bothers me. But in theory, trying to get private investment in as well as public investment is a good thing. It's only a question of what you spend it on. I mean, Scotland has like is a world leader in wind, probably. And so, there is an argument for saying you could really do a lot with offshore wind and the tidal energy, which we haven't talked about a great deal. The question on everybody's mind is, when you're dealing with something like that, is it ever going to be enough or stable enough to form the basis of a full national grid? Or is it always going to need to be backed up by something else? And what is that something else? And the second question is it going to be cheaper than gas? Well, eventually, no, because as fossil fuels decline, they're just going to fall in price. So, no. The question is how more expensive will it be for people? And it's really hard to judge that, actually. I don't actually know. I just suspect that we aren't going to go back to cheap energy.
Thank you. So that's the economic side. The political side, Stuart, there were two themes came out during the general election campaign. One, what is GB Energy, and whether it will or whether it will not actually generate any electricity. And some politician, and I forget who, warned that it will end up as a bun fight with different cities competing to be the headquarters for GB Energy, which probably won't produce any jobs of note for that city, but it will be seen as a feather in the cap, and will completely derail the argument. And that exactly was the story in the newspapers last week of the different cities competing. So I'm interested in your view on the politics of GB Energy.
So I think the Francis thought was very, very helpful there in terms of the economic side, because it does look like GB Energy is just going to be more of an investment vehicle as compared to an energy generator. And to the election campaign, that was very much disputed by Labour. There were claims that it was going to generate energy, but it does look as if it is now more. It's an investment vehicle. I think the location of the headquarters I think you're right, Douglas, in terms of wherever it goes, it will be about having a brass plaque on a building and a location. But also it will be in Scotland, and I welcome any additional jobs coming to Scotland. So I'm not going to be churlish about that. I would like to have seen it in Greenock, but it looks like Greenock is now going to be ruled out. It's just going to be one of the three cities, and it will go wherever it's going to go to. I think the common sense situation would indicate that it should go to Aberdeen, with Aberdeen being the energy capital of Europe. But we will see what the political decision will be in terms of the location. But I think Francis said that the one point which I don't think it's been widely considered thus far, and that I think is regarding the cost of energy and the potential for the days of cheap energy are now gone. If we look at how much additional we are going to have to pay for Hinkley, the new nuclear power station being built down in Somerset. Now, was it billion? Was it some? Was it £90 billion or so that Hinkley's costing? Now that's a huge amount of money, and that money's got to come from somewhere. So the issue of energy, the issue of cheap energy, the issue of how it's going to affect every single household UK-wide, we are going to be paying for that going forward for basically the remainder of my lifetime and also beyond. And when we look at the opportunity that renewable energy has, we cannot afford to not capitalise upon renewable energy. Scotland has done very well in terms of the onshore and offshore investment in renewables. We can do more, and I think we should do more because for me it's about leaving that legacy, that cleaner legacy for future generations. And I genuinely believe that's something that's hugely important, and we should do a lot more. And it shouldn't just be about putting renewable devices anywhere. There has to be also that local decision making is hugely important in this to bring the population along with you on that journey. But renewable energy is absolutely crucial for Scotland's energy generation, but also for the economy, in addition to having a clearer environment.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure also in terms of the economic argument, it's not just providing energy for Scotland or for the United Kingdom, but there's also a huge potential for export of energy. I know there was talk of a connector going to Germany.
Yeah, also bootstraps are already there down the west coast and east coast. There's already linkages between Scotland and Norway, and also in terms of the southeast of England over to France. So having that interconnected world is what we currently live in anyway. But having that interconnectivity in terms of energy supply is hugely important. And going back to the very beginning of the programme with the update on Ukraine, if we look at what's happened in Ukraine in terms of the energy supply, this in terms of the renewable energy source that we all have, we need to make sure that we can reduce our dependency upon fossil fuels, so that we can actually, first of all, power our own countries, but also sell energy. And where there's a situation we see in Ukraine, we could potentially do a lot more to actually help in terms of supplying energy to countries that are going to need it and require it, if other conflicts take place as well.
Thank you, and thank you both. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donations if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,000. Please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you again to our guests today, Francis Coppola, who makes economics understandable for the layman like me, and to Stuart McMillan, MSP, for your valuable contribution. And thank you for watching, and goodbye.